Postpartum hemorrhage is one of the leading causes of maternal deaths worldwide. Today on News in Depth, we join Effie Mphande as she finds out why heavy bleeding after childbirth has remained one of the leading causes of maternal deaths. She'll also be talking to two survivors of postpartum hemorrhage. Welcoming you to this week's News in Depth program. My name is Pennifer Nyirenda.
Any woman who has had a child before will tell you that the pangs that come with childbearing are incomparable to any pain that comes in the course of womanhood. They say the pain, though coming in spasms and cramps that wrench the soul, more damage is done to the flesh, which is stretched and ravaged in the process. But women are undaunted. For them, it is a labor of love to which many return, bringing forth new life into the world according to their planning. They are impervious to the odds and dangers that lie in this miraculous process of life that has claimed many of their kind. The biggest danger any woman faces in the process of bearing a child is the bleeding. It is normal for a woman to bleed when giving birth, but the bleeding, if excessive, becomes a danger to her life. Uncontrolled bleeding, way past the time a woman has given birth, is a serious but rare condition. And it usually happens within a day of giving birth or after a few days. This excessive blood loss is called postpartum hemorrhage. Women usually lose about 500 milliliters during normal birth. And after a cesarean birth, about 1,000 milliliters of blood is lost. But in the case of a postpartum hemorrhage, a woman can lose much more blood, which is what makes it a dangerous condition. About 1 to 5 in 100 women who have a baby have postpartum hemorrhage.
Postpartum hemorrhage, or PPH, is bleeding after childbirth. And in this context, we usually refer to bleeding within 24 hours. And it's one of the leading causes of maternal deaths worldwide. And even down here in Zambia, it's actually number one.
Mrs. Z, not her real name, is a survivor of postpartum hemorrhage. She was brought to the University Teaching Hospital's Women and Newborn Hospital in shock. Her blood was not clotting. Mrs. Z lost 1,500 milliliters of blood. She has been transfused with 6 units of blood and 6 units of clotting factors. This is her 6th child.
Nomba kati na alisa alipuka ko blood alisa mbokufuma sana so kule kanyama kliniki bali filo kuikontrola blood wateileke okufuma.
On the next bed is another postpartum hemorrhage survivor. Mrs. X had a ruptured uterus, but it has been repaired. She lost 2,500 milliliters of blood and was transfused. This was her 5th child, but sadly, the baby died.
Ku clinic balisanjwa tumufulemu apapira ku UTH pantu mwalikwata siza nakale. So lufumo po yabukire nali shire first rate kuno kwene ku UTH. Basantuma kufieta kuli. Nali sankati placenta yasalepuka na blood shakwete blood kundepa hapa kubalembika blood mpaka wa umwana basandanga tumwana uyu bati apitira.
What causes postpartum hemorrhage?
There are 4 major causes. The most common is uterine atony, or where the uterus fails to contract after delivery. It just relaxes, fails to contract to stop the bleeding. The second one is retained products, where the placenta is retained. So those tend to have problems because you find that those products will make the uterus not contract. For example, a retained placenta or fragments of the placenta remain inside the womb. The other causes are genital tears. The woman delivers an unusually big baby, and then the tear occur either on the cervix, either on the vagina. That will lead to bleeding. Then we have other causes like just clotting disorders. This woman just has clotting disorder. They just fail to stop the hemorrhage. So that's another cause. Then the other one, it occurs, but though rarely, is ruptured uterus. It can rupture during labor and present as bleeding after delivery.
Postpartum hemorrhage can cause a severe drop in the mother's blood pressure. If not treated quickly, experts warn that it can lead to shock and death. But what are the symptoms of postpartum hemorrhage?
The major symptom is the bleeding, but depending on the amount, they may go into shock. Then they develop what call palpitations, the heart racing. Then they also have headache. They will complain of headache, general body, with feeling weak. You touch their hands, they'll feel cold. Pulse is weak.
The UTH Women and Newborn Hospital has 3 labor wards. B12 is the main labor ward. Critically ill patients are kept in C13. In the B12 main labor ward, about 5 women lose their uterus in a quarter.
Like in a day, on average, we record about 30 deliveries. Then in a week, we have on average about 250 deliveries.
Iron deficiency is a global nutritional problem affecting infants, children, and reproductive aged women, especially during pregnancy. According to the World Health Organization, WHO, 50 to 60% of pregnant women in developing countries are iron deficient. Both Mrs. Z and Mrs. X were anemic during pregnancy.
There are those women who enter labor with anemia. Those have a high risk because even losing a small amount, which could be less than 500, could drive them into shock.
Postpartum hemorrhage usually happens without warning. What are the other risk factors associated with postpartum hemorrhage?
The risk factors include women with higher number of children coming to labor ward maybe in their 9th pregnancy, 8th pregnancy. Let me say any pregnancy above 5 presents a challenge because they have a higher risk of bleeding after childbirth. Women carrying multiple pregnancy or twins or more, they have a higher risk. Women with unusually big babies, more than 4 kg, are also at risk. Women who have previous surgery, for example, cesarean section, and those who were bleeding during pregnancy, could be what we call antepartum hemorrhage or bleeding during pregnancy. Due to low-lying placenta, those have a higher risk of developing bleeding after delivery. And then women who prolong in labor. They've been laboring for long, maybe 1-2 days. The uterus gets exhausted.
Home births are not uncommon in many rural communities of the African continent. Zambia is not an exception. Experts recommend institutional delivery. Postpartum hemorrhage is a medical emergency and requires immediate hospitalization and measures to stop the bleeding.
It's an obstetric emergency, and it requires teamwork to manage. One health provider cannot manage postpartum hemorrhage. Now, there is also what I can call as a underestimation of blood loss by most health providers, where this woman is bleeding, or the blood may be dripping on the floor, soaking the bed covers, Some of it might be mixed with urine. So it may mask their quantity.
For a transfusion perspective, when we are talking about support to a pregnant mother, it's not just talking about the mother herself. We are also concerned about the fetus and the newborn. Transfusions may be required in the pregnant woman before, during, and after delivery. Transfusion may be required to the fetus even before they are born. They are what we call intrauterine transfusions if there are any defects that are detected in the unborn child which might endanger their lives and might necessitate transfusions even before their delivery using very advanced techniques. You can do intrauterine transfusion or immediately after delivery in the neonate with the newborn. They may be born with the various complications that might need blood transfusion support to sustain their lives.
How common is postpartum hemorrhage?
This is a very common condition here. Yeah. And out of the 25 deliveries that we conduct, about 2 or 3 cases will be recorded as PPH, which is postpartum hemorrhage.
It is common. From our figures, actually, it accounts for almost 40% of maternal deaths. So it's still number one, followed by, of course, the hypertensive disorders. We have obstructed labor, infections, and unsafe abortions.
WHO estimates that 14 million women around the world suffer from postpartum hemorrhage. The risk of maternal mortality from heavy bleeding is 100 per 100,000 live births. Most deaths from postpartum hemorrhage occur in low and middle-income countries compared with only 1% in industrialized nations. Sometimes bleeding is heavier than normal. What are the complications associated with postpartum hemorrhage?
The complication may involve renal shutdown. The kidneys just shut down because of severe hemorrhage or heavy bleeding. They may also end up with heart failure because of anemia. There is also a risk of these women because of the massive bleeding ending up in conditions which we call DIC, disseminated intravascular coagulation, where they fail to clot. But the most important thing is anticipate and manage early. Time is critical. For example, someone starts bleeding and they have lost 1.5 liters. You have a 30 minutes to 45 minutes to save them.
What measures are being put in place to reduce cases of postpartum hemorrhage?
To start with, it's health promotion. The other component of the new guidelines is that we need to have a scan done in pregnancy, and we know that a scan can be very helpful, and it will help us identify all problems that might be lead to postpartum hemorrhage. So having a scan as part of the antenatal care is also one of the new guidelines, and we are implementing that. The other things that we are doing are actually happening within the delivery period itself, ensuring that the health workers that we're training are exposed to life-saving interventions. So a curriculum for training nurses and midwives has been reviewed to ensure that not only emergency obstetric care, but other interventions that may reduce postpartum hemorrhage.
But what challenges is Zambia facing in addressing postpartum hemorrhage?
One of the biggest problems we have is we've got one, malnutrition. Most of the women are malnourished and therefore anemic as they start their pregnancy. The other challenge that we have is that our facility delivery is not very good. We are around 67% we need to have every woman delivering in health facilities. The other challenge we have is that we need skilled birth attendants. We don't have enough skilled birth attendants in our country. But as a country, we are trying our best to ensure that the other healthcare providers are also skilled.
Unlike in the past, in today's world, there are life-saving drugs to prevent postpartum hemorrhage. Take, for instance, oxytocin, a life-saving drug used to prevent postpartum hemorrhage, has a consistent quality problem in low and middle-income countries.
There are multiple issues as to why many low and middle-income countries do not have access and are not using quality-assured drugs. They relate to poor manufacturing, so therefore a government is attracted to a cheap price in terms of people responding to tenders or people offering products in their market. And of course, a cheap price, not always, but in most cases, will relate to shortcuts in manufacturing, which impact upon the quality and stability of the drug. Secondly, even if the drug is usable and stable at the time it's manufactured and purchased, unless you can assure through a cold chain infrastructure all the way through that product is going to be kept between 2 and 8 degrees, then there is a high chance it will start to lose potency, and again the same outcome, that it potentially doesn't work when required.
But how is Zambia dealing with this?
You will find that we have a mix. Part of the oxytocin is procured from manufacturers that require the oxytocin to be kept at 4 degrees Celsius. Whereas the other part of oxytocin we have it remains potent at room temperature, and that one is distributed to areas that may have challenges with maintaining 4 degrees Celsius temperature.
In most rural parts of the African continent, the cold chain is non-existent.
So I think there's a couple of things that can be done. The first is raising awareness amongst purchasers, government purchasers and others around the importance of quality assurance. In other words, that you need to be buying drugs whereby the World Health Organization has certified that this manufacturer makes a quality drug. And then it's about building infrastructure for the cold chain, which of course is a long-term, complex and very expensive undertaking. So currently for oxytocin, the message is buy quality product that is quality assured. If it costs a few cents more, it's a price worth paying as opposed to a potential death. We accept there is no cold chain facility in rural settings, in hard to reach settings. Then the second line recommended drug, misoprostol, which is a tablet rather than an injection, is an appropriate method of use for prevention and treatment of postpartum hemorrhage.
With oxytocin and misoprostol sensitive to heat and moisture respectively, how are organizations dealing with maternal and reproductive health addressing this?
This initiative that we put together is to do some clinical development work with WHO to look at the use and the safety and efficacy of heat-stable carbetocin as compared to oxytocin, specifically for vaginal delivery, specifically for the prevention of postpartum hemorrhage. And WHO, who is running and executing this clinical trial called the Champion Trial, just completed the recruitment of that trial. It's the largest clinical trial ever done in postpartum hemorrhage. Nearly 30,000 women across 10 different countries, with over 15,000 African women have gone through this clinical trial, including from Nigeria, Uganda, Kenya, South Africa, and Egypt. So WHO is now doing the analysis of that trial. We're waiting for the results with bated breath.
The Zambia National Blood Transfusion Service is an integral part of the effective management of maternal bleeding and deaths. Dr. Mulenga now highlights the kind of response the blood service offers.
When they say pack 1 for us, it means the doctor wants 4 packed cells of red blood cells to maintain adequate oxygen transfer within the body and maintain metabolism and life, and also require 4 packs of fresh frozen plasma. Fresh frozen plasma is a blood component that contains all the coagulation factors, which will try and control the bleeding.
But the service has got its own challenges.
We have increased significant change in the demand for blood, brought about by one, obstetric challenge which are known, but Zambia's population has been growing. So the number of mothers who are presenting with all these obstetric complications have increased. We have introduced renal treatment, and we're now talking about renal transplant, where we want to start doing cardiac transplant. We have built a lot of new hospitals and improved, upgraded a lot of existing facilities. So the demand for blood in Zambia has gone from 150,000 to 300,000 units. You require more revenue, more resources, and I don't think in our current financing mechanism it's adequate to support cancer treatment in its robust way, and it's the other support services such as the transfusion support required.
Postpartum hemorrhage is the leading cause of maternal mortality, accounting for about 35% of all maternal deaths, according to WHO. Between 1990 and 2010, there was a global reduction in maternal deaths and the maternal mortality ratio from 543,400 per 100,000 live births to 287,210 per 100,000 live births respectively. However, developing countries continue to experience higher numbers of maternal deaths compared to developed countries. In 2010, the maternal mortality ratio in developing countries was 284,000 maternal deaths per 100,000 live births compared to 2,200 maternal deaths in developed countries. But are African governments doing enough to tackle maternal deaths?
The advantage of being my age is that I have lived for a long time and I have seen enormous progress. I have seen thousands of women die per 100,000 live births, and now the numbers are getting less and less and less. African governments have done a lot. They could do more.
4 of Mrs. X's children were born without complications. This is the first time she had suffered from postpartum hemorrhage.
Ngakunganda nganalifwa bantu blood nga balifumya kwisa n'abantu bambi baleshitako donate blood kupera kwa bantu.
Experts had many things to say about postpartum hemorrhage.
Good maternal health comes when the couple is well nourished, the mother is well nourished, so good nutrition is essential. I would also say that spacing pregnancies is also a great contributor to good maternal health. So when your baby can walk around and carry water without spilling it, it's the good time to have another baby.
The world today is more tolerable than it was before because it has learned from past experiences and has made life more bearable. What used to kill has now been tamed. This is why knowledge or information is now more valuable than ever before, because this can save life.
We've come to the end of this week's News in Depth program, where Effie Mphande was looking at why postpartum hemorrhage remains a leading cause of maternal deaths around the world. Next week on the program, we'll be joining Macpherson Kuka as he helps us appreciate the transformation of Lusaka in as far as cleanliness is concerned. This has been Penny Fanyarenda saying goodbye and do stay blessed.